Mr. Moore?
Good afternoon.
I don't think it needs, I don't think
okay.
it
You
needs
don't have
a
to
lot
look- you don't
more
have to be afraid.
introduction. We know what
Yeah,
this
I'm
is.
not sure I need any more
That's right.
introduction. So, good afternoon. What you have in front of you today is master encroachment agreement and some direction to enter into those agreements with Bird and Lime, the two companies that represent the scooter industry here in the city of Raleigh today. We made some changes to what you had seen previously in our previous iteration. We had some conversation about parking near schools, parking on streets that had no sidewalks. We made a correction on that to make sure that it's parked within 2 feet of the curb. We made some changes related to the hours and some changes related to pricing. One thing I would like to ask your direction on today is, in addition to the change that we made to say the rollout would be in the morning at 6 a.m., in conversation with the companies, they've asked that we do that a little bit earlier, that a lot of the deployment that happens around 4 to 5 a.m. That, in a way, could be a good thing. It could help keep folks out of the sort of downtown and early morning commuter traffic, so it help keep them outside of rush hour a little bit. So I'd like your feedback and direction on that.
Okay. Council?
As it relates to the early morning, 4 or 5, how close is this to where people are going to be living at that early in the morning? Is it quiet? Is there a lot noise? I mean, what are we talking about here?
There should not be a lot of noise. This is typically pulling these out of a truck and just deploying them on the curb. So,
Okay.
which shouldn't be any more disturbing than garbage collection.
Okay.
So.
Well, garbage collection is not always quiet.
Okay. So, sounds like on that one particular item, you need feedback on us on whether we're okay.
Yes.
So what does the council feel about moving it to 5 or 4?
I think
Five.
I believe presently they actually have already put them out between 4 and 6 a.m. To make sure that they're already in where they need to be as early morning commutes happening. So I'm comfortable with 4.
Okay, so Mayor, I've got some questions about this encroachment agreement. So if we could turn over to 4.2. So in case of termination, it says licensee shall remove all fleet vehicles upon determination of the termination of the agreement. It doesn't specify a length of time.
We would assume that to be immediate.
You know, we know about assumptions. We need to put within 7 days, I think.
We can certainly make that adjustment.
And what line was that?
That was 4.2.
Okay.
Also, under the 5.2, where it talks about the fleet size, if there's an increase, they should pay us within 5 days. If you turn over to page 10, under item E, and this one is shall be paid within 21 days. Is that something different, or it looks to me it's the same?
We will correct that, and we'll make it within 5 days.
Okay. Also on 7.4, we're talking about let's see here. About bonding. Yeah, indemnity. I don't see any dollar amounts there. What's the size of the bond requirement?
There's not one in there right now.
There's not one in there right now.
And we need to put something in
we
there.
will-
We're going to make this a document that we're going to ask folks to sign, and we're going to be responsible for. So what's reasonable? What's typically done here?
I don't have a number off the top of my head. I think that would be something we would need to discuss.
Fair question.
Also, what's the requirements as far as the bonding company rating for a bond like this?
That would default to what we use for our standard agreements, our standard encroachment agreements. I do not know that number off the top, but it's,
I don't know off the top of my head either.
but it would what we would use for our standard encroachment agreements.
So do we prohibit offshore bonding companies? If we don't, we should. Also, when we turn back to the licensing payment agreement under 5.1, the fee of $150, I strongly feel this is not enough money. Even on the way over here today, there's blatant people breaking the rules where it's, this is a good document. Y'all spent a lot of time on this, and I appreciate it. But there's going to be a lot of cost to the city to administer this and also to start enforcing these regulations. So I'd like to move for approval of this document with these changes. And instead of $150, it should be $300
Per scooter?
per scooter.
And the $70 fee, is that paid one-time administrative fee, or is that paid per scooter? Can you explain that, please?
That's a one-time administrative fee, and that would be in addition to the encroachment agreement fee as well. So it is not a per scooter fee.
What is the average fee across when you all look it up?
When we looked at this and did our benchmarking, we found that it varied widely. Most of the time, the per scooter fee was varied anywhere between $25 per scooter, but with a higher kind of fee on top of that. To I think the highest we'd seen was about $130 per scooter, but I know there have been conversations elsewhere about as much as $150 per scooter.
So I have a question. Is there a legal reason why, rather than relying on Bird or whomever it might be to keep us in tune as to how many scooters are sitting on our streets today? I'm not sure that I think that that's the best place to get our data from, but let's say we do. Is there a reason why we can't charge one flat rate of $150,000 a year to have an agreement with the city for an access agreement?
With the scooter companies? So the 150, if we were to have a maximum fleet of 1,500 scooters, would actually generate 225,000. So it would be total for three companies, or how many ever we decide we want to be part of that.
So my question was, is there a reason why statutorily we can't just charge one fee for each company?
I think that it's a new thing, and you can sort of make up the rules somewhat as long as they're consistent with our encroachment policy. In the end, you're going to have a fee that relates in some way to the administration of the program, and I think that's sort of open right now. So that's the requirement, is that it's not a money-making venture for the city, that it somehow the administration is related to the money generated. I think that's sort of an open question right now.
So Robin, that makes total sense to me. We don't need to make money off this. What my question is, does administrative fee also include the law enforcement side of that?
I think it could, absolutely. It's whatever city services are required, and this might be a little different than outside dining, for example, because there might need more services from law enforcement, from my office. I think it's, as I've said, I don't know that we know definitively what the answer to that is, because it's a little bit different than other encroachment agreements, but yes, you can take into account whatever resources the city is expending to run the program.
So really the first year, we're shooting in the dark on our fee, and then after we have some data from that year, we'll have a better idea and we can make adjustments? Correct.
I was going to just add to say, part of the reason we asked for this approach to say we would do an interim period and then go to the RFP, it would give us enough time to understand what the true cost of the program is. So we weren't necessarily be overcharging at the beginning or drastically undercharging at the beginning, but we would give us an opportunity to have a period of time for some learning. So
Yes, and so I have, I read this document very thoroughly, and know if everything is done according to this document, it's going to take a lot of administrative staff time in this building, and also police officers doing their job. I think that's what I based the number on. Also, I don't want anybody on the table to forget that they've used this city for 3 or 4 months for absolutely free without asking anybody anything.
For
So,
permission.
right. So I do have a motion on the table.
So can I just ask for clarification?
Okay.
The 5.1 fees, they're annual or one time?
Annual.
Okay. And could you just restate your motion for me?
Yes. Gail helped me with this, but I've made the motion for approval based on on 4.2. We're going to insert the time 7 days. If this is terminated, they have to get them off our streets or sidewalks. Also, 5.1, that's the fee. It's not $150, it's $300 per scooter, and the $70 will remain the same for the one-time fee. Also, you're going to make the correction in on page 10, 8.1E. You're changing the 21 days back to 5 days.
Correct.
The bond requirement will be city standard amount, whichever y'all normally do. No offshore bonding company, and the bond rating of the company shall be no less than what is typically accepted by the city.
We have one other change we had to make, which was the hours. That
Yes,
is.
the hours, and one
so
last
we
thing
have-
for clarification is, it says it's restricted, as far as minors. Would you define what a minor is?
Under 18.
Under 18, so they have to be 18 or older to use this
And
scooter.
that corresponds to most companies' rules of operation already, so.
Okay.
And what about, we've seen several instances where a person who is 18 or older is riding, but they have a child or an infant either in their arms or sitting on the scooter bottom part. Is that,
I think we have in here no tandem riding.
okay.
You have in here only one user per vehicle.
Correct.
And what is the effective date?
We would hope to have this in place within 2 weeks.
So can I at least get a vote from the council on whether you would like to change the starting time to 4 or 5 or split the difference at 4:30?
And just say 5.
5.
All right,
5.
5. So 8.2.L, change 6 a.m. to 5 a.m.
So just for clarity for me too, the RFP will, if it were to happen, will circumvent this agreement?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
That's why we have very broad rights of termination under this.
okay. And then that'll also allow you time to look at adjustments. And say, for instance, it doesn't happen. This goes in, this is reviewed annually, and we can make updates annually?
Yes, sir, we can do that.
Okay.
So I will make a second to Mr. Thompson's motion.
Okay, before I call the question, I do have one question for the attorney, and that is, with the change in the dollar amount to $300 per scooter, if at the maximum of $1,500 is $450,000. So is it incumbent on us to justify that amount of expense, or?
Well, if you were, not at this time.
Okay.
I think that you can say that's an estimate and see how it all works out. I don't think that you need to analyze the data once it comes in and make that determination and make an adjustment. But for right now, I think that that's your best estimate. Then you work with that, and if it's not correct, then you can fix it later.
I'd also,
Again, it's a new program. I
Yeah.
think that you're fully justified to do what you can to make an estimate as what it's going to take to make it work.
Okay,
I'd also like to bring up the idea of lifting this cap and instead using a utilization cap. So instead of having an arbitrary number of 500 per scooter company, having a cap that is based on the average rides per day of each scooter, which is monitored already by the scooter companies, and we could work closely with our staff to continue to look at. So if right now there's a lot of, one of the companies uses a baseline of 3 rides per day If they maintain an average of 3 rides per day, then they're at a good number. If they increase to 4 rides per day, then they'll add more scooters. If they decrease to 2 or 1 rides per day, then they would decrease the number of scooters. And we may see a decrease in ridership this winter as things get cold. So I really kind of like this idea of a utilization cap as opposed to just an arbitrary 500 cap per company.
I think we're so new at this, it might be helpful for now just to set a cap that we all know and understand. It might not be what we move forward with, but we could look at it later.
I think to have 1,300 scooters out there already with Bird and to drop them to 500 is going to be a big mistake in terms of really adopting this kind of technology and being innovative. And that's kind of my big concern, instead of just throwing a 500 cap out there and knowing that there's already 3 rides per day per scooter at 1,300 scooters. I have real issues with that.
So the utilization cap, is that, you're saying that's how the scooter companies determine how many scooters they're gonna?
That's something we would use based on information they already have, and they kind of do it internally.
So if there's a, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember, it was a 1,500 scooter cap at 500 per company?
Yeah, for 3 companies.
Do we have a third company?
No, we do not yet.
So could it just be a 1,500 cap?
I mean, so what if we say it's a 1,500 cap and we only have one company that even decides that they want to agree to this, and we've limited them to 500?
That's correct. We would have a max per company and a max per the
Well, I
city.
guess in our RFP, we can make that determination.
Right.
Remember, we're
then-
not doing an RFP yet.
And what's the time frame do you think we'll be looking at doing the RFP?
Well, council's direction was to come back as soon as possible. We'll have a draft outline for you with pretty much what we would think would be the important criteria to consider for that at your November 20th council meeting.
Which, now, if we said we're going to use the data for the RFP, and we've asked them to come back as soon as possible, I think as a council, we've just gave conflicting direction. And what I mean by that is, if we're saying we're going to use the data to set our numbers, there's no way in 14 days.
I
Mr.
think-
Branch, I didn't
yeah,
say I was going to use the
Yeah, I
data.
don't think that's.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So
Okay,
that was,
no, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 2 months, you're not gonna have that information. We're
Right.
talking about.
Well, I
at the end of
disagree.
July, when,
It's already there.
sorry,
I disagree. They've had 4 months to operate, so they've got data.
have they shared that with
Well, that's the thing. I have not heard of any
me either?
utilization data.
So we haven't seen anything.
But they certainly
I
could share
have,
it
and I
within 2
believe-
weeks.
I have, and I believe staff has as well, and I believe they've reached out to
Why
other
hasn't
council
that been
members.
shared with the rest of the council?
I believe they've reached out to other council members who've been interested in this issue.
They haven't
Who's-
reached
who's
out to
they?
me.
I haven't seen anything.
I haven't either.
I'm interested.
okay.
So,
Like I said,
I
not-
guess
not
my
to stir
only
anything.
question is, if we want to have a cap of 1,500, is there some way that we can do that to the companies that are operating or willing to sign the agreement that we don't end up with 500? Because
Mayor,
there's only one company.
so let me offer a little clarity around the RFP. So we're going to bring back to you kind of a rough outline. That can be a number that we can fill in and have further conversation about, get more data about. The process is going to for us to actually put the RFP together, to get the selection team together, to get all that, will take us a bit of time. That number can be one that we can insert as long as it's within the policy direction you provide us, regardless if it's a number that we pull from the air or a number that we use utilization data for. Either of those can go into the RFP before it's actually submitted and
Well,
advertised.
I mean, I think for the RFP, that's great, and absolutely, the utilization data makes sense. I'm just saying, if we do the master agreement and that takes effect, and
We could be limited to 1,000 scooters.
or 500 if only one company signs up, so.
There's a motion and a second.
Second, I know. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, next on the agenda, we have